On May 8, 2025, something extraordinary happened on the cold gray tarmac of Vnukovo Airport in Moscow. While much of the world anticipated Russia's traditional Victory Day parade, it was a different kind of arrival that stole the show. A Russian presidential aircraft, typically reserved for the likes of Vladimir Putin, touched down. But this time, it didn't carry a Russian official. It carried Captain Ibrahim Traore, the 36-year-old leader of Burkina Faso. No suit, no entourage, no apologies. Traore descended the steps in full military uniform, gun strapped at the hip, red beret firm on his head. He didn't step onto Russian soil as a mere guest. He arrived as a symbol of defiance, the face of a new Africa no longer willing to bow to Paris, Washington, or Brussels. And the Kremlin didn't just welcome him, they sent for him. Russia had dispatched one of its elite Ilyushin Il-96 aircraft to personally transport him. What followed was not just a ceremonial trip, it was a geopolitical earthquake. And the question that shook every Western foreign desk was simple. Why him? Why now? What just happened in Moscow? In this video, let's find out. When Captain Ibrahim Traore stepped onto Russian soil, it was not the usual head of state spectacle with red carpets, diplomatic limousines, and a fussy welcome committee. It was something far more calculated and far more symbolic. Traore didn't arrive via a commercial aircraft branded in Burkina colors. He descended from an Ilyushin Il-96, part of Russia's presidential fleet, the same airframe used by Putin himself. That fact alone sent shockwaves through observers in Paris, Brussels, and Washington. This was no ordinary reception. It was a declaration. Military transport for a military leader. An African president received with the same strategic respect and logistical protocol, typically reserved for wartime allies. The symbolism was thunderous. Russia wasn't just offering an invitation, it was offering alignment. This wasn't just a diplomatic visit. It was the initiation of something far bigger. And then came the image. Traore emerged in full combat gear, not camouflaged for war, but draped in defiance. Gun visible, posture stiff, expression calm. It was a rebuke to the Western power of the puppet African president in a suit, begging for aid. Traore didn't come to Moscow for favors, he came to forge alliances on equal footing. This entrance shattered old assumptions about African diplomacy. He didn't sneak into power, and he wasn't going to sneak into Moscow either. He arrived like someone who belongs on the battlefield, and who has earned a seat at the global table by surviving it. But the message didn't stop with his descent from the aircraft. The clothing said everything before a single word was spoken. Traore stood amid a sea of presidents and dignitaries wearing sleek suits and silk ties. But all eyes turned toward the man in a Burkina military uniform stitched with rebellion, resilience, and national pride. It wasn't just olive green fabric. It was a uniform that had been tested in real combat, worn through 18 coup attempts and blood-soaked power struggles that would have broken most leaders. His jacket bore medals, flag patches, and campaign ribbons. It bore scars the West pretends not to see. And at his side, a sidearm, controversial to some, but to many Africans watching, it was a badge of reality. I didn't rise through parliament, I rose through the fire. This image of an African president armed, armored, and unapologetic didn't blend into the Kremlin's background. It burned through it. To Russia, this was all too familiar. Strong men built from military roots have long formed the backbone of Moscow's post-Cold War diplomacy, from Syria to Belarus to Venezuela. Traore wasn't an outlier. He was a prototype, a young, bold, anti-imperialist leader challenging the old colonial order. But more importantly, to Africa's restless and disenfranchised youth, his image was a revelation. Here was a leader who didn't kneel to foreign powers, didn't wear the clothes of the colonizers, and didn't disguise his origin. He brought the revolution into the Kremlin and dared the world to call it diplomacy. That moment wasn't crafted for the Western press. It was designed for Africans watching across the continent, from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, who have been waiting for a leader who doesn't perform for the West. And just when you thought his statement had peaked, he took it off the podium and straight to the people. What happened next wasn't part of any protocol, and it wasn't on the Kremlin's official agenda book. While other heads of state remained confined to VIP rows and security details, Captain Ibrahim Traore did something unexpected. He walked out among the crowd. No layers of separation, no special handlers, just a man in uniform, in the heart of Moscow, greeting ordinary people. And something remarkable happened. Russian citizens, African migrants, and foreign students surged forward. Taxi drivers stopped and honked in support. Young Africans shouted his name. Elderly Russians, veterans in their own right, reached out and saluted. Not because they were told to, because they felt something real. This wasn't PR, this was presence. For Russians who have seen decades of photo-op diplomacy with bland Western figures, this was electric. For the African diaspora living under suspicion or isolation in a country like Russia, it was validation. Their president had arrived, and Moscow welcomed him. In Victory Day ceremonies typically reserved for Soviet nostalgia and Russian grandeur, it was the face of Africa that stole the show. That's not just historic, it's transformative. And it was here, surrounded by strangers reaching out to touch the tip of his uniform, that Ibrahim Traore demonstrated the quiet force of African dignity. Not performed, not scripted, felt. What began on the tarmac as a military maneuver had now evolved into popular momentum, not just in Burkina Faso, but globally. And this people-powered presence would soon walk its way right into a Kremlin banquet hall. As night fell over Moscow, the velvet corridors of the Kremlin echoed with clinking glasses and muted conversation. In the grandeur of imperial chandeliers and polished marble, Traore, a soldier from the Sahel, stood shoulder to shoulder with heads of state, men whose countries dominate nuclear treaties, energy routes, and international markets. For a man who often dines with foot soldiers under canvas tents in Burkina Faso, this moment wasn't just ceremonial. It was a geopolitical elevation. When President Vladimir Putin extended his hand and raised his glass toward Traore, smiling warmly, it wasn't just good manners. It was a subtle but potent signal to the watching world. Traore, once dismissed by Western analysts as a military interim leader, was now a peer in high diplomacy. The Kremlin, known for its icy calculus and long memory, doesn't seat revolutionaries next to Putin by mistake. Every position at that table reflected status, and Traore's placement told a new truth. Africa's resistance bloc had earned its invitation to shape the global order. From eating with farmers in Dori to toasting with Putin in a gold-leafed hall, the journey was not just physical, it was continental. For Burkina Faso, this was more than a dinner. It was the start of a diplomatic realignment rooted in sovereignty, not subservience. But if the banquet was a signal of inclusion, the next morning offered a deeper moment, one that transcended politics. On the morning of May 9th, a date sacred to Russia's national identity, Traore joined a line of solemn figures as they approached the tomb of the unknown soldier. Red Square was silent. Banners waved in the cold spring air. Cameras flashed, but the leaders said nothing. This was not a space for words. For Traore, laying the wreath was more than protocol. It was memory, recognition, and solidarity. The ceremony, which honors Soviet soldiers who died fighting fascism in World War II, carried an unspoken resonance for an African soldier president currently engaged in his own fight, not against tanks, but against insurgency, foreign manipulation, and neo-colonial interference in the Sahel. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Traore stood in that moment with the weight of every fallen Burkinabe soldier on his shoulders. To the world, it was a wreath. To Traore, it was a declaration. Africa knows war too. Africa dies for sovereignty too. That moment, captured on film, wasn't just a gesture of respect for Russian history. It was a demand that African sacrifice be acknowledged on the same stage as Europe's. And in that demand, Traore advanced his deeper mission: to normalize African strength on the world's most powerful platforms. But if the wreath ceremony echoed the past, the next scene was unmistakably about the future. To Traore, it was a declaration. Africa knows war too. Africa dies for sovereignty too. That moment, captured on film, wasn't just a gesture of respect for Russian history. It was a demand that African sacrifice be acknowledged on the same stage as Europe's. And in that demand, Traore advanced his deeper mission: to normalize African strength on the world's most powerful platforms. But if the wreath ceremony echoed the past, the next scene was unmistakably about the future. As the clock struck noon, Russia's Victory Day parade thundered to life. Rows of disciplined soldiers marched across the red bricks of the Kremlin Plaza. Missile launchers, armored vehicles, Sukhoi jets cutting arcs across the sky. It was an exhibition of hard power, a reminder that despite Western sanctions and isolation, Russia still commands attention. Among the few invited to witness this display from the Kremlin's exclusive platform stood a 36-year-old African president, not in a tuxedo, not as a ceremonial observer, but as a symbolic pillar of the new Eurasian-African axis. Traore didn't flinch. While others marveled, he stood still, hands clasped, eyes forward. Between Putin and senior Chinese representatives, his uniform didn't look out of place. It looked strategic, because this wasn't just a military parade, it was a lineup of global allies. And by placing Traore in that tight circle, Russia was making it very clear: Africa is no longer neutral ground. Burkina Faso has chosen its side, and its side is welcome here. From the dining room to the parade ground, the message was consistent. Traore is not being courted as a client. He is being embraced as a co-architect. But beyond the formalities, there was something even more telling. It was how Russian civil society reacted. The day after the parade, the scene shifted from military spectacle to cultural symbolism. At Moscow's prestigious Mendel University, the mood was festive but reverent. Traore didn't walk into a meeting room. He walked into a welcome ceremony, one rich in Slavic tradition and African rhythm. African students danced, draped in Burkinabe colors. Russian students sang in the chorus. Then came the bread and salt ceremony, an ancient Russian custom reserved only for distinguished guests, symbolizing hospitality, trust, and shared destiny. When Traore accepted the bread, surrounded by cheering students, something rare occurred. East and Africa merged in a moment of mutual reverence. This wasn't just pageantry, it was a window into the soul of the alliance being built. For Russia, the future isn't just about hard power. It's about influence through education, soft diplomacy, and ideological alignment. For Traore, this wasn't about signing deals. It was about building human connections that last longer than news cycles. In a world where young Africans are often forced to study in France under systems built to control, this moment showed something new, an alternative path through Russia, with dignity intact. And behind these warm gestures, the real engine of this visit, the strategic discussions, was already going on. By May 10th, diplomacy became concrete. Traore entered the Kremlin's secure meeting rooms, flanked by aides and greeted by senior Russian officials. The smiles remained, but the tone shifted. This was no longer about optics. This was about military calculus. Sources close to the discussions confirmed what analysts had long suspected. This trip wasn't ceremonial, it was operational. Defense cooperation, military training, arms support, and officer exchanges were all reportedly on the table. And this wasn't a new flirtation. As early as 2023, Russia's Deputy Defense Minister Yevkurov had visited Ouagadougou. That visit, largely ignored in Western media, laid the foundation for today's reality: a structured security pact between Russia and Burkina Faso. In those private rooms, Traore wasn't begging. He was negotiating. Training for Burkinabe pilots, Russian instructors on the ground, intelligence sharing, joint operations. The unspoken assumption: France is out, Russia is in. While official communiqué remained vague, Russian outlets hinted at a new dimension of cooperation. Observers understood what that meant. Military aid was already moving, quietly, precisely, and without Western permission. And as Traore walked out of those closed doors, the entire Sahel felt the tremor. The age of dependence was over. Burkina Faso was making decisions not based on colonial memory, but strategic necessity. Interestingly, the images from Moscow were still circulating when the Western press found its voice and its fear. In Washington, State Department officials tried to downplay the visit. In Paris, foreign policy analysts spoke of deep concern. But behind the diplomatic spin, a simple truth was settling in. The West had lost control over one of the most strategically vital regions in Africa, and it had no meaningful plan to recover. The editorial boards of major Western publications called it a strategic disaster for France. Another, more bluntly, said, "Africa is walking off the map and toward Moscow." What triggered this alarm wasn't just Traore's handshake with Putin. It was the timing. Just months earlier, Burkina Faso had formally exited ECOWAS, the Western-backed regional bloc long used to channel influence and economic pressure. In its place, Traore had joined hands with Mali and Niger to form the Alliance of Sahel States, a new sovereign security compact that doesn't answer to Paris, Washington, or Brussels. It was a tectonic shift, and one the West never saw coming. While Western powers were still clutching their worn playbook of sanctions, military bases, and soft power lectures, Russia had quietly positioned itself as the trusted partner of sovereign Africa. Moscow offered weapons, training, and crucially, respect. No colonial baggage, no NGO paternalism, just deals, defense, and dignity. So when Putin invited Traore to Red Square, it wasn't for optics. It was to seal a pivot from Sahel military isolation to Eastern strategic alignment. And in that realignment, Western powers found themselves not just outmaneuvered, but irrelevant. Yet what rattled the West most wasn't what Putin gained. It was who Traore became next. He became the face of the new Africa. To one side stood President Emerson Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe, a veteran of post-colonial resistance. To the other, Mahmoud Abbas of Palestine, a symbol of decades-long confrontation with Western-backed powers. Nearby stood representatives from South Ossetia and Abkhazia, breakaway republics that exist outside of NATO consensus, but inside Russia's strategic umbrella. And more importantly, Traore was placed front and center of a new geopolitical bloc, not the G7, not BRICS, but something emerging beneath the headlines, a coalition of the defiant, the unaligned, the post-Western world. This wasn't about ideology, it was about a shared rejection of imposed dependency. And with Traore's presence, Africa officially joined that narrative. From being dismissed as a coup-born leader, Traore was now seen as a new breed of statesman, militant, independent, and unapologetically African. No longer was Burkina Faso just a conflict zone on some Western diplomat's risk map. It had become a nerve center of resistance, drawing lines in the sand between colonial legacy and strategic self-determination. And the West, still clinging to ECOWAS communiques and outdated assumptions, found itself watching from the sidelines. What do you think? Isn't it time African leaders should stop flying to Paris and start flying to Moscow like Traore just did? If Russia treats Africa with respect and partnership, why should Africa keep begging from the West? In the comment section below, let us know whether you agree that building military, educational, and economic ties with Russia is exactly what Africa needs right now. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.